He walked into my office holding divorce papers. The man I trusted most, the man I loved, looked at me with cold indifference. "I'm done," he said. "She can give me everything you never could." The words hit me like a punch I never saw coming. The air around me felt suffocating. Every memory, every promise, every shared plan between us dissolved in an instant. He didn't pause. He didn't apologize. He didn't care. I stared at the papers, unable to speak. My heart raced, my hands trembled, but my mind was sharp. This was deliberate. He wanted everyone to see me as powerless. Humiliated. A woman discarded. And he succeeded. He left the room, holding his head high, smug in his sense of victory. Everyone in the office had seen it. Whispers started immediately. I felt the sting of humiliation, the raw ache of betrayal. But underneath it, a quiet fire ignited, a fire that no amount of heartbreak could extinguish. He thought he had won. He thought I had nothing. He believed I would collapse, that I would cry, that I would beg. He was wrong. Completely wrong. I took a deep breath. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I didn't react. I just watched him go. Every smirk, every laugh he shared with her, every boast about his new life fueled me. He had made a colossal mistake. For years, I had trusted him blindly. I had believed in our love, in his loyalty, in our shared future. I had invested my heart, my time, my energy. And now, all of it was considered worthless. But I didn't need him to see my worth. I knew it. And I was going to prove it. I began thinking strategically. Every humiliation he caused, every word he used to belittle me, became ammunition. I realized that real power doesn't scream. Real power waits. It observes, it calculates, it strikes when least expected. I started reviewing my options. I began reconnecting with old contacts, revisiting investments I had dismissed, noticing opportunities he had overlooked. Every plan he ignored became my advantage. Every decision he considered irrelevant became my secret weapon. He flaunted wealth that wasn't truly his. He paraded his success, believing it was permanent, believing it would define him. But arrogance has a way of blinding people. And he had blinded himself to the fact that I had been silently building, silently growing, silently preparing for a reckoning that would leave him powerless. I thought about the office, about the humiliation. About the way colleagues had stared, the whispers, the pity. It would have crushed anyone else. But for me, it became fuel. He had underestimated my resilience, my intelligence, my vision. He had assumed I would crumble. He had assumed I had no plan. I didn't need to confront him. Not yet. The world would see soon enough. And when they did, it wouldn't just be a revelation, it would be a reckoning. I began documenting every opportunity, analyzing every flaw in the systems he trusted, every weakness in the networks he relied upon. I took notes, made calculations, and silently positioned myself in places he never expected. The man who divorced me in front of everyone thought he had erased me. He had only set the stage for my rise. I remember thinking about the irony. He had left me for wealth. He had left me for someone he thought could provide more. And yet, he had no idea that his arrogance had handed me the tools to surpass him in every way. Every time I saw his social media posts, every time he flaunted luxury or influence, my resolve strengthened. Every laugh, every boast, every casual remark about how he had won only reminded me of what he didn't know, what no one yet knew. I began taking calculated steps. I reached out to former colleagues, revisited old contracts, explored investments I had never had time to fully pursue. Every action was precise, deliberate, silent. No one could see it, no one could predict it, and most importantly, he had no idea it was happening. I thought about revenge, not as an act of anger, but as a demonstration of capability. I wanted him to understand, when the time came, that power is not about wealth, not about appearances, not about connections, it's about vision, strategy, and execution. And I had all three. The first months after the divorce were the hardest. Friends tried to console me, family offered sympathy, but sympathy isn't power. Action is. Every day, I woke up thinking about what I could build, what I could achieve, how I could turn humiliation into influence, weakness into authority. I reviewed his company, the one he believed untouchable. The one he flaunted as his victory. I studied its structure, its gaps, its leadership. I analyzed its strengths and weaknesses. And slowly, methodically, I began positioning myself where I could make the ultimate impact. The more I learned, the more I realized that his arrogance was my advantage. He believed he had power over me, over the company, over his future. But he had ignored one thing: the woman he discarded was not weak. She was patient. She was intelligent. She was capable. And she had a plan. I began to visualize the day he would realize the truth. The day he would understand that the woman he humiliated, the woman he discarded, had risen far beyond anything he could imagine. I imagined the shock, the disbelief, the silent recognition of his miscalculation. It became my driving force. Every email I sent, every meeting I attended, every decision I made, I did with purpose. I wasn't just surviving, I was building. I wasn't just observing, I was preparing. I wasn't just waiting, I was moving. He had believed that divorcing me in public, humiliating me in the office, would end my story. In reality, it had only begun the first chapter of my triumph. The fire he lit by underestimating me would burn brighter than anything he could ever control. Months passed. I quietly expanded my influence, formed strategic alliances, reclaimed opportunities he had overlooked, and positioned myself in ways that would allow me to control outcomes he thought were impossible. The man who had humiliated me had no idea that every step he took to show power only paved the way for my rise. Every humiliation, every slight, every moment of disbelief from others became fuel. I channeled it all into strategy, into intelligence, into action. I didn't need the world to see yet. I didn't need validation. I needed preparation. And when the time came, the revelation would be absolute. He had thought he had ended my life in that office, that divorce papers in hand would erase my presence, my worth, my power. But I had learned something crucial: underestimation is the most dangerous mistake anyone can make. And he had made it. By the end of the year, I had established a foundation so strong, so precise, and so silent that nothing could topple it. This wasn't about revenge through anger. It wasn't about retaliation through cruelty. It was about power, calculated and undeniable. And deep inside, I knew one thing for certain: the man who had humiliated me, the man who had discarded me in the most public, humiliating way possible, was about to face a reality he could never prepare for. Hook for Part 2. While he flaunted his new life with her, I quietly began taking control of the company he believed untouchable. The same company where he and his new wife thrived, would soon belong to me. And when he realizes it, it won't just shock him, it will destroy his arrogance entirely. After the office betrayal, I knew that my first priority wasn't confrontation, it was preparation. Power isn't given. It's taken. And I was ready to claim it. I started by studying the company he believed untouchable. Every contract, every decision, every flaw he had ignored became my map. While he flaunted his new life, I analyzed opportunities no one else could see. I identified weaknesses in operations, overlooked leadership gaps, and areas where influence could be quietly built. No one suspected anything. To them, I was moving on, rebuilding my life, quietly recovering from heartbreak. But in reality, every action I took was deliberate. Every conversation I had, every connection I nurtured, brought me closer to a goal they would never anticipate: control. I reconnected with old allies. People who had underestimated me before, who had doubted my ability to succeed, now became part of my network. I didn't need sympathy, I needed strategy. Each alliance was chosen carefully, each conversation crafted to build influence and insight. I also revisited investments I had previously dismissed. Opportunities that seemed minor at first glance became powerful tools. I learned the subtle art of leverage, how to position myself where no one could see, yet still hold the power to shape outcomes. While he believed he had left me powerless, I was quietly rewriting my story. He flaunted wealth, arrogance, and public confidence, but he was blind to the most important fact: I had vision, determination, and patience. I wasn't racing against him, I was building ahead of him. Every day, I reminded myself that timing was everything. I didn't need to prove myself yet. I didn't need to strike yet. I needed to be untouchable first. I needed to create a foundation so solid, so strategic, that when the time came, the shift would be inevitable. Slowly, I began acquiring small stakes in sectors related to his company. Each acquisition seemed inconspicuous, but collectively, they built leverage. I studied his patterns, the way he made decisions, the weaknesses he ignored. Every oversight he made became a future advantage for me. I wasn't just building wealth, I was building control. Influence. Authority. The kind of power that cannot be stolen, cannot be bargained for, cannot be ignored. The kind of power that would force him to realize, eventually, that he had underestimated me in every way. People often ask how I stayed focused. How I turned humiliation into opportunity. The answer is simple: I refused to react emotionally. I refused to waste energy on anger or revenge. Every resource, every thought, every step I took was calculated. While he celebrated a victory he believed absolute, I was quietly becoming the one with the real power. I began attending industry meetings, subtly introducing myself in circles he had once dominated. I listened more than I spoke, absorbed more than I revealed, and positioned myself in places where I could influence decisions without anyone noticing. My rise was invisible, but unstoppable. He had assumed that divorcing me had ended the story. He didn't see the quiet work, the late nights, the strategic planning, the patience. He didn't understand that being underestimated is the ultimate advantage. Every mock, every laugh, every careless word he spoke about me became fuel. Months turned into a year, and my influence expanded. I had silent control in areas he had ignored. I had allies he would never suspect. I had information he had overlooked. And the company, the very empire he boasted about, was slowly becoming my stage. I knew that the ultimate moment of revelation had to be perfect. Not just a confrontation, but undeniable proof that I had risen far beyond his expectations. And so, every decision I made, every investment, every relationship, was building toward that inevitability. Even my personal life became a tool for strategy. I wasn't just preparing for power, I was creating leverage. The man who left me believed he had destroyed me, but in reality, he had set the stage for his own downfall. Every time I received a report from the sectors I controlled, every insight about the company, every subtle shift in influence, reminded me of how far I had come. He had divorced me thinking he had won, but the quiet rise I had orchestrated was invisible, precise, and unstoppable. And the most satisfying thought? He had no idea. Every decision he made, every public declaration of wealth and triumph, only tightened the web I was building. He thought he controlled his life, his company, his empire. But he had no clue the real power was quietly taking shape, underneath, unseen, unstoppable. By the end of this year, I had secured my influence across critical areas of his company. Not enough for a public takeover yet, but enough to ensure that when the time came, no one, not even him, could resist the shift. The seeds of control were planted. The foundation was solid. The ultimate revelation was coming. Hook for part 3. While he celebrated his arrogance and flaunted wealth he didn't earn, I was quietly becoming the one who controlled it all. The company he thought untouchable, the empire he flaunted, it was only a matter of time before I claimed it as mine. By now, my rise was no longer subtle. The foundations I had quietly built over months had begun to consolidate into undeniable influence. Every small stake, every overlooked opportunity, every alliance I had nurtured positioned me closer to total control. The man who divorced me believed he was untouchable. He walked through the corridors of his company with confidence, believing he had power. Every decision he made, every strategy he implemented, every boast he shared about his success, was feeding my momentum. He didn't see it, but he was paving the path to his own downfall. I began attending board meetings, not as a disruptor, but as a voice no one ignored. I offered insights, suggestions, and strategies that were too valuable to dismiss. Slowly, subtly, the executives who once followed him began to see me as the one who understood the company's real direction. Influence is rarely taken overnight. It is earned, built quietly, and leveraged strategically. I had mastered that art. Investments I had made quietly began to yield returns that amplified my leverage. Departments I had analyzed, leaders I had quietly advised, started moving in ways that aligned with my long-term strategy. It wasn't just about money, it was about control, about influence, about shaping outcomes without anyone realizing I was orchestrating them. The irony was delicious. The man who had publicly humiliated me, who thought he had destroyed my life, had no idea that his empire was slowly shifting beneath his feet. He continued flaunting his new life, confident that nothing could touch him. Confidence is dangerous when misplaced. Every week, I monitored his moves. I studied the decisions he made. Each one revealed gaps in his understanding, mistakes in judgment, and arrogance that blinded him to the truth. Every misstep became a future advantage. I didn't need confrontation yet. I only needed patience, and timing is everything. The employees he believed loyal began to notice subtle changes. Board members started seeking my advice. Strategies I suggested quietly reshaped the company's trajectory. The very empire he had assumed belonged to him alone was now bending to my influence. I watched from a distance as he struggled to maintain control. The small victories I orchestrated were invisible to him but undeniable in impact. Productivity shifted, decisions became more effective, departments aligned better under subtle guidance I provided. It was like a shadow takeover, unseen, unstoppable. I had learned a crucial truth: real power is silent. It does not boast. It does not cry. It acts. Every investment, every alliance, every subtle maneuver had been part of a larger plan, a plan that was now beginning to bear fruit. The company he believed untouchable was gradually, irreversibly, under my influence. And then came the moment that would mark the turning point. A key decision, one he thought trivial, was influenced by data I had quietly gathered, recommendations I had subtly shaped, and alliances I had formed behind the scenes. The outcome aligned perfectly with my strategy, showcasing results that even he could not ignore. He began to notice me, not as a forgotten ex-wife, not as someone he had humiliated, but as a force he could not dismiss. I had entered the realm he controlled without a single confrontation, without a single public claim. The quiet rise had turned into undeniable influence. Every day, I reminded myself that patience was my greatest weapon. I didn't need to reveal my position yet. The company, the empire, and eventually he himself would recognize the reality in their own time. And when that moment came, it would be irreversible. I began consolidating my influence further. Critical departments, key leaders, and pivotal decisions were all under my subtle guidance. It was no longer just about influence, it was about shaping the company's future, and nothing he could do would stop it. The man who divorced me in public, who thought he had humiliated me forever, was now unwittingly working under the shadow of my strategy. His arrogance blinded him to the truth. The woman he discarded was now the architect of his company's success. And when the world saw it, the humiliation would be complete. By the end of this period, I had achieved something extraordinary. I wasn't yet the owner, but the empire was responding to my vision. Departments followed my guidance. Decisions reflected my strategies. Influence I had built quietly now shaped outcomes at the highest levels. I knew the ultimate moment of revelation had to be perfect. Not public humiliation, not vengeance, it had to be undeniable proof that I had risen beyond his expectations. The man who had underestimated me would finally see that power is built, not inherited. Hook for Part 4, the company he thought untouchable was now subtly under my control. Soon, he would realize the woman he humiliated had become the force behind every major decision, and nothing would ever be the same. By now, my influence was undeniable, though invisible. The departments he once controlled unquestioningly were subtly aligning with my strategies. Decisions he thought were final were quietly being guided by me. Every success he took credit for was, in reality, shaped by my planning. He began noticing inconsistencies. Small things at first, reports that contradicted his expectations, teams acting independently, projects exceeding goals in ways he didn't anticipate. He questioned his managers, trying to understand the sudden improvements. And yet, no one mentioned me. They couldn't. They didn't know who was orchestrating it. I watched him struggle. The same arrogance that had humiliated me now blinded him to the reality forming right under his nose. Every meeting he led, every strategy he promoted, subtly reflected my influence. He was fighting against a current he couldn't see, and that current was me. The thrill wasn't in revenge, it was in precision. Each step was calculated. I didn't need to confront him yet. The power I had built quietly was more satisfying than any public confrontation. He was beginning to realize, though he didn't fully understand, that things were shifting. And the realization terrified him. The first department to respond fully to my strategy was the finance team. Recommendations I had quietly introduced months ago were now being implemented successfully. Profits increased. Efficiency soared. Leaders began asking for more input, without knowing where it was coming from. I had created influence so deep that even executives were unaware they were following my guidance. He noticed. And panic began to flicker in his eyes. He thought he had control, but his authority was eroding quietly, invisibly. Every attempt to assert dominance was met with subtle resistance he couldn't trace. He had been blinded by his own arrogance. It was satisfying, but I didn't allow myself to feel triumphant, yet. Timing is everything. The ultimate revelation must be undeniable. Every department I influenced, every decision I shaped, was leading to the moment when the company's leadership, and he, would understand who was truly in control. I continued expanding influence. Critical meetings I couldn't attend personally were guided through proxies I had placed strategically. Recommendations I made months ago were now being implemented, producing results no one could argue against. The empire he flaunted was quietly responding to my vision, my intelligence, my foresight. He began to notice my presence. Not as an ex-wife, not as someone humiliated, but as a force he couldn't ignore. Every time he tried to assert authority, subtle corrections aligned the company with my strategies. Every misstep he made became a lesson in underestimation, one he was forced to learn the hard way. And then came the first direct challenge. He called a high-level meeting, confident he would regain control. He presented his strategies, his ideas, his decisions. But every department's results contradicted him. Reports reflected outcomes aligned perfectly with my guidance. Leaders subtly supported the decisions I had influenced, not his. Shock registered on his face. Confusion. Panic. He tried to argue, to assert dominance, but no one followed him blindly anymore. Influence I had quietly built had shifted loyalty, not openly, but decisively. He realized something critical: the company he thought was untouchable was no longer his domain. I watched quietly, without intervention. His arrogance had blinded him. He thought he controlled everything. Yet, every subtle change I had implemented ensured that the company was now responding to me. The man who had humiliated me in front of everyone had no idea that he was now operating under the influence of the woman he discarded. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The satisfaction came from precision, from execution, from proof that power is built quietly, strategically, and with patience. He was learning a lesson he couldn't ignore, one step at a time. By the end of the quarter, he was visibly shaken. Executives sought my advice more than his. Departments followed strategies aligned with my vision. Every decision he made was subtly corrected by the structures I had built. He was still unaware that I had orchestrated this. He believed it was coincidence. But it wasn't. It was skill, patience, and intelligence. And the thought that once humiliated me, that once left me in ruins, would soon realize the full scale of my rise, that thought fueled every remaining step of my plan. Hook for Part 5, the moment of revelation was approaching. The empire he believed belonged to him would soon be undeniably mine. And when he discovered the truth, it wouldn't just shock him, it would shatter his arrogance completely. He walked into the boardroom, confident as ever. Smug. Arrogant. Certain that the company he had flaunted, the empire he had boasted about, was still his. He had no idea that every decision, every outcome, every subtle shift over the past year had been orchestrated by the woman he had publicly humiliated in the office. I stood silently at the head of the room, my presence unnoticed at first. The same woman he had divorced, the same woman he had discarded for wealth, now commanded attention without a word. All the subtle influence, every calculated move, every alliance, had led to this moment. "Let's begin," I said, my voice steady, calm, unshakable. He glanced at me, a flicker of recognition passing through his eyes. But he didn't understand yet. Not the full picture. The meeting started with reports, numbers, performance metrics, outcomes, all reflecting the strategies I had implemented. Departments that once followed him blindly now moved in ways he couldn't control. Executives subtly aligned with the initiatives I had driven. The empire he believed untouchable had quietly, inexorably shifted under my guidance. Everything is performing above projections, I continued. Efficiency, revenue, employee engagement, all indicators show remarkable improvement over last quarter. He opened his mouth, ready to assert control, ready to claim credit. But the room didn't follow him. Executives looked at me, nodding, awaiting my guidance. Confusion flickered in his eyes. Panic. The first sign that he was beginning to grasp the truth. I smiled faintly, letting the moment stretch. Timing is everything. The revelation must be undeniable. And now, I said, there's something I need to make clear. I paused, letting every word sink in. The company you thought was untouchable is actually owned by me. Silence. Absolute, crushing silence. He froze. The arrogance, the smirk, the confidence, all vanished. He looked at me as if seeing me for the first time. What do you mean?" he stammered. I placed the documents on the table, the official records showing ownership, shares, and authority, all in my name. $2 billion. Complete control. The empire he had believed belonged to him was legally mine. Every department, every decision, every strategic move he had taken for granted now answered to me. Shock registered across his face. His mind raced, trying to grasp the reality. The woman he humiliated, the woman he discarded in front of colleagues, had quietly built the empire he thought was his. Every misstep he had taken, every arrogance-fueled decision, had only strengthened my position. Executives looked on, understanding the truth. Loyalty shifted. Influence settled. The company responded, not to him, not to arrogance, but to vision, to strategy, to undeniable authority. He tried to speak, to assert control, to regain dominance. But words failed. The room no longer followed him. Every action he had relied on was now guided by me. He had underestimated me in every possible way, and now he was powerless to reverse it. I spoke again, calm, professional, decisive. This company runs on strategy, foresight, and execution. All of which I have provided quietly, patiently, and relentlessly. The same skills you underestimated in me have brought this organization to heights you never imagined. He sank into his chair, defeated, humiliated, not just by me, but by the reality that he had empowered the very person who had been discarded. His arrogance, his assumptions, his public humiliation, all returned to him as proof of his failure. And one more thing, I added, my voice firm. Every decision you made for the past year, every move you took to assert control, has only accelerated the outcome I predicted. Your empire, now legally, operationally, and strategically, belongs to me. The weight of the statement hung in the air. I had anticipated this moment for months, planned every step meticulously. And now, the culmination of patience, strategy, and precision had arrived. He could no longer deny it. He could no longer resist it. Executives began discussing next steps, strategies I had silently guided into place. Departments shifted seamlessly into my vision. Every corner of the company acknowledged my authority. And he, the man who had once humiliated me in public, was nothing more than a bystander, powerless, shocked, and utterly defeated. I watched him struggle to regain composure, but it was impossible. He had made the fatal mistake of underestimating me. He had believed divorce papers in the office could erase me, but instead, they had triggered a rise he never saw coming. I leaned forward, calm, professional, unyielding. This isn't about revenge. This is about recognition. Recognition of vision, skill, and persistence. The lesson here is simple: never underestimate anyone, especially those you dismiss as powerless. His silence confirmed the victory. The empire he had believed belonged to him was now fully under my control. Every subtle influence I had built, every calculated move I had orchestrated, every alliance I had nurtured, all converged into this moment of undeniable authority. And finally, I delivered the statement that would echo in his mind forever: you chose wealth over loyalty, arrogance over respect. That was your decision. But this is the reality you failed to anticipate. The woman you discarded now owns everything you ever flaunted. Shock. Silence. Power shifted completely. I had won, not through rage, not through confrontation, not through public spectacle, but through strategy, patience, and foresight. And the man who believed he had control had no choice but to accept it. If you want to see more incredible stories of revenge, power, and unstoppable rise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and click the notification bell to never miss a new story from our channel.